So I use like active disinformation to try to throw off hackers and
Did you
scammers.
make any progress?
They'll call me and they'll be like, "Hi, it's Elizabeth."
I
And I'm
think
like,
we haven't done that.
"No, I know you're a scammer. Sorry." And then I turn around.
Thank you. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sort of like, let him go.
Well, the thing that happens is when a school closure gets hacked, you're not necessarily gonna have all the finances throw away. The computer turns into
That's
and that's
really one of the
kind of what gets me.
I didn't even think of that, but
And I mean, they're all doom and gloom. There's just I've been able to put them together that are inexpensive, that are cheaper than anything you buy at Best Buy or Staples, and they offer real protection.
yes, like they just.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
No.
Yeah, taking a look at from the outside, that like you can't obviously break into a computer, but you can look at what's happening on the outside, and you can kind of tell if systems are organized that way. So,
All right.
looks like you guys have some problems.
Hello. Welcome, everyone. We are now officially in the Sunday of summer. Today, my name is John Odell. Today, we're going to do a presentation on the climate initiatives and the Green Worcester plan that we're doing here in Worcester. Now, I know not everyone here lives in Worcester, but I think some of the stuff that we'll talk about here will translate to whatever community you're in. Either some of it may already be in process at your community, or if not, you can steal some ideas and bring to your local representatives and say, I know the guy who has the plan and I can get it for you. So if you're interested. So part of the whole reason why I put this together is the city a while back, we've been doing a lot of stuff, which I'll very quickly highlight, but realized that we needed a more cohesive plan to put in place so that we could go forward in a more managed pathway, so that we're not sort of going from here to there and what we need to do and when we need to do it. Makes things much harder, both for planning purposes but more importantly, in some ways, for funding purposes. If you have a green plan like we do, it allows us to use that repeatedly to go after funding sources, particularly with the federal government and philanthropic groups. So that's sort of the quick background on why we put this together. It took a long time to actually do it. We initially were hoping to have it all done by Earth Day of 2020, which would have coincidentally been the 50th year of Earth Day. As we all know, the pandemic hit just before that, so everything got postponed for almost a year. But so this, we got out this past spring officially, endorsed by the City Council of Worcester. So that's the other nice thing, is having a plan like this endorsed means that we don't have to keep on asking for every single plan that we go through. We just have one package. We say, oh, no, you already approved it, so we're going for it, which makes things a lot easier when you trying to move projects forward and people have all these questions. And it's not a question of should we do it, it's a question of how, which is a very different question, as we all know. So with that sort of preamble up front, let me just walk through what I've got for you. So the best way to start, I think, is to give a little context of how we got the city in particular, and my small group of folks who put this together from the city side, the background. So the first bit of key information is what's called the Global Warming Solutions Act. It was, it basically set in motion a lot of the programs that the state in particular and a lot of communities have used it and followed their own plans. This was sort of the first big one that came through the state that sort of set the table for a lot of stuff. So the Global Warming Solutions Act, it basically says by 2020 will be 25% statewide greenhouse gas emission levels, and by 2050 will be 80% below, based on 1990 emission levels is the baseline there. Important to note is that this was never intended to be the final plan. It was sort of like the first marker, with the intent that over the next few years there'd be more plans that came forth. Some did, and then we'll get to a little while ago. It took a little while, but this past spring we had the big one, the Carbon Roadmap Act, which was passed by the state too. So a couple other big policies just to sort of touch on. There was the Green Communities Act, which also came in 2008. And then the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, some people may have heard it by the RGGI program. That was sort of the first carbon cap and trade program in the Northeast. It was a whole bunch of states that got together and did that. The good news about that is it really did affect how much emissions came from power plants, fossil fuel power plants. It still has a pretty big impact today. In fact, they're trying to expand on it. So a couple other policies just to note, just for context, an act to promote energy diversity, an act to advance clean energy, and an act creating a next generation roadmap for Massachusetts. So I put 2021 in with a question mark, but I should have updated. Look.
New ones. Down.
Hello. And we're back. And so that was the roadmap I mentioned actually did get passed. So it's not a question mark anymore. It's actually something that happened. So these are the numbers that this graph that you can see up your screen. I don't know if you can all see it, but basically it shows what the emission levels have been since about 2005. So in 2005, and as of today, you can track in the four main, well, it's really five main emission sectors: transportation, buildings, electricity, non-energy related emissions, and industrial emissions. So the thing to note over that is that when I mentioned briefly that RGGI program that has directly affects the emission levels at fossil fuel plants, sometime in about 2011-12, buildings and electricity, the production of electricity, the amount of emissions flipped in terms of the order that they were in. Emissions at power plants has gone down significantly over the last 15 or so years. And buildings has gone down too, but not nearly as much. Transportation, as you can see, is almost flatline. That's the area of greatest opportunity in the near term and in the long term. Non-energy and industrial also has been pretty much the same as it's always been. So from the state's perspective, this next slide just sort of shows what the general path is to a net zero future. And net zero means that net zero carbon emissions. So that's basically sort of we're using predominantly renewable energy, and most of the processes that we do to heat our homes or move vehicles around are not using fossil fuels. And so it basically, in short, is that we're going to have to reduce the demand of all these, first of all. So energy efficiency is the first choice. And then the second choice is that we switch everything over from fossil fuels to a non-fossil fuel powered source. So that's basically what this slide details. So the big note in here is that wind and solar become huge parts of that transition. And it's not just wind and solar, but also transforming a lot of our buildings and homes so that they're not heating and cooling using gas or oil or propane, but it's all, we convert most of that to electricity and power that electricity through renewables. So that's the idea. So, and the triple is back. Yes, yeah, we're back with triples too. This is awesome. So moving forward on what opportunities come from that roadmap for that the state passed will be a few things. So one is that we'll be able, it allows cities to adopt local bans on fossil fuel new construction. That's something that's already sort of percolating into a number of communities, including Worcester, throughout the state. That is it's a preloaded piece there. It sounds like, well, that's of course what we do, and one could have said that 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. But the problem is that there's a lot of especially gas infrastructure already in the ground. There's a lot of costs associated with that. The maintenance of all that are borne by ratepayers, and so if ratepayers all of a sudden start switching over to electricity, the electric company is pretty happy, but the gas company has fewer and fewer people to pay for that upkeep of the infrastructure in particular, which means that their costs go up, and that those costs usually get borne by the people who can afford it the least. So how we work that is still an open question, but it's going to happen. It's just more when than if at this point, but that process is still being figured out so that we don't negatively impact folks that can't afford to make the switch. So I'll skip the further details. I'll go back to that later. So the Green Worcester Plan is short for the Green Worcester Sustainability and Resilience Strategic Plan, which I think explains why we call it the Green Worcester Plan. And it's built on an understanding of sustainability and resilience that sort of have multiple factors that work into them, but we're defining sustainability as the way to meet today's the needs of today without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. We're looking at it through resilience, which is becoming more and more important as we see what's happened over in Germany and China and out west with the wildfires, and in India with all the floods. That's what I meant by what's happening in Germany and China, for those not aware of tremendous flooding that happened over there. That flooding situation could very easily happen here. We had a taste of it just about a week ago, and some of you may have seen some of that, the impact on some of your streets, where it took our stormwater system was tested more so than it has been in a long time since oh gosh, I think it's been about 6 or 7 years since we had a rain that heavy, that fast. And that was a small taste. And what happened in other areas was much, much worse, and could easily happen here too. So we need to start building that resilience in our own community. And then the triple bottom line is just, we got to figure out a way to make this economically feasible so that we don't negatively impact, like I said, the people who can afford it the least. So part of what we did when we put together this plan is, like, I have a lot of great thoughts. I'm sure each of you have some great thoughts, but we figured it kind of made sense to hear what people in Worcester actually thought about the idea, and how important they thought sustainability and resilience was. So we did a survey. We went out and did a telephone survey, along with an online survey, but the telephone survey was the primary factor. Reached out to over 600 people, and it got their it got information from that helped determine what the plan would include and what it would not include. And so one of the basic questions we asked is, how important do you think it is to, what's the value of making the city more sustainable? And as you can see, and it's very encouraging to see, is that 64% said it was very important, and another 25% said it was somewhat important. So we figure that's just about 90%, 9 out of 10 folks thought the value of doing this work is important. It's worth us doing. there we go. So based on that, what did we decide that the city itself should be? What's the vision for Worcester? And we thought, well, let's be bold. Let's say we're going to be the greenest mid-sized city in the country. And now that's a little aspirational, but also I think it shows that our commitment to it, our leadership position in it. We've done a lot already. We want to do a heck of a lot more. And so we said, let's you don't set vision statements that are we're going to get to 38% of where we want to be. That kind of vision statement is not very visionary. So we went with the greenest mid-sized city in the country. And you can see the details here about how we're going to do it. But one of the key pieces I want you to see here is that we're going to be 100% powered by clean and affordable energy, as well as physically, socially, and economically resilient to the impacts of climate change. So that's a notable one that we included there. And one might argue one of the toughest ones too. Couple things about the plan itself, then I'll start walking through some of the couple of the details. The plan's a living plan because the changes that are happening in society as a whole, but certainly in the sustainability and resilience sectors are proceeding apace, as they say. Very quickly, a lot of changes, both from a perspective, an outlook about what people think about it, as well as technological, as well as what the impacts we're dealing with directly and how we're going to manage those in terms of what comes first and priorities. All those things have been changing. And so we need to make sure that the plan can evolve and change with the needs of our community. So it's aspirational and pragmatic. It's not overly prescriptive, though it does have certain very specific goals that need to be made and adhered to. It encourages actions and goals as opportunities arise, such as changes in the financial and regulatory changes from the state and federal authorities. It makes sure that we work together. That's a huge piece. Often we end up working in silos. City government is notorious for that, but I think any bureaucracy suffers from that to some level. Is that often the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and we got to avoid that, because unless we're all rowing in the same direction, this is we're not gonna make it, candidly. So we all got to get on the same page on this and make sure that what we do has a lens of understanding that this what we're doing going to be sustainable for the future and resilient for the future. That's part of it too.
Good morning.
And then another key piece is that we're going to be transparent and accountable through an annual public report on the progress we're making. So, it's great to say all this stuff, but the proof is in the pudding. We actually have to start doing this stuff, and we're going to report on it every year. And then, candidly, there will be some areas where we won't have as much success in the beginning as we hope, and hopefully other areas where we exceed where we want to be. But that will be a learning process as well, so that we can hopefully bring more resources to bear on the areas where we need help. So also, the last bit I want to mention here too is we're going to make sure that this is a collaborative and that the community is involved on this. This is not going to be a top-down program. It's got to be not from the bottom up either. It's got to be from top, bottom, left, right, the whole bit. We all got to work on this together. Not everyone's going to be on board at the beginning, of course, but the idea is we get enough people that you build momentum and that pretty much everyone is going down the right path. So I briefly talked about this already. It's the plan itself is a strategic framework for sustainability. It has an integrated and systemic approach to make Worcester the greenest mid-sized city in the country. And it's a plan focused on city leadership, but in partnership with residents, businesses, institutions, state, federal government, nonprofits, etc. As important as it is to say what the Green Worcester Plan is, I think it's also pretty important to say what it isn't, because that can be where the often we get the confusion going forward is like without being very careful about saying what we're not including in here. So one of the key pieces, as I mentioned earlier, is it's not prescriptive. So there will be some changes here where as the time goes on that the plan evolves. That's important. It also is not the plan is not one of the existing or proposed municipal plans that I've noted here below, and I'll run through in a second. And it's not specifically a climate action plan, though it has some overlap with the climate action plan. But it's really, it's think of it more, I think the analogy that seems to work best is it's not the ingredients to making a particular meal or piece. It's the menu that you find at the restaurant that says, here are what we're going to be serving, but how we actually build the menu for each one of those dishes is still to be determined. So that's sort of the way I kind of look at it, that what we're building here, the Green Worcester Plan, is the menu that shows that this is what's on available for us to pursue and why. And then we work and put together the detailed plans based on that menu, and then implement those as we go forward. So we're going to be guided. This whole process is we're going to look at stuff through 3 lenses. I think I mentioned a little bit ago that we want to make sure that this Green Worcester Plan from the city's perspective infects, if you will, all other processes of government, as well as just community and society as a whole in here, so that people start thinking about it a little bit when they do upgrades on their own home or business, and certainly when we do things on the city side as well, when we're updating roads and bridges and any other of our infrastructure, that we keep these 3 lenses in mind. So the first lens is equity. Equity is basically what you think it is. It's all people having the same rights to live, work, and play in a healthy environment and make decisions about those environments that they live in and work in and play in. That's key. The next is health. We need to make sure that the policies and actions that we do promote healthy outcomes and avoid harmful health impacts. And prosperity, that all this has got to work economically. We got to create new jobs and transition folks from jobs that aren't helpful and sustainable in the long term to more sustainable jobs and assist in that transition. I'm going to just touch briefly on the health lens, because this is some information I only came across a couple months ago, but it really kind of struck a nerve for me, and I figured it might for others. So I want to just talk very specifically about the health lens. So I think most everyone is aware that the Industrial Revolution has put an awful lot of carbon in the air and continues to, but started way back in the 1850s in particular, and that the East Coast of North America is certainly one of the key areas where a lot of that originated. Other places where we have an awful lot of carbon emissions are in China and India, and of course in Europe, including Russia as part of that. So they did a study in 2018, so not that long ago, research by Harvard University in collaboration with the University of Birmingham and the University of Leicester and the University of the College of London. And they basically use satellite data to determine how many people are exposed to particulate matter from fossil fuels emissions, and to determine how many people died prematurely because of it. And based on the information they got, it accounted for 18% of the total deaths for 2018. Could be traced back to the deaths to being caused by fossil fuel related particulate matter. And so when you look at that, that's almost 1 out of 5. And so I took the number of people who died that year in the world, the estimated number, and extrapolated that down to, okay, what does that translate for Worcester? So you could actually get a feel for that. It's 195 people in 2018 died because of the particulate matter that had been caused and put out by everybody in the world that flows all over the place. So it's not just what's happened in Worcester. Worcester has its history of pumping out quite a fair bit over the years. But that's a real number. It's only a number that's actually getting higher as we go forward. So it just brings home that this is very real, and 200 people is far more every year than how many people died from COVID, just to put that in context. We lost more people in the last year from this than we did from COVID, which is in Worcester, which is, I think, we all know how bad COVID impacted us. This is even worse than it, and no one even paid attention. So going back to, all right, so that's the bad, the scary part. You don't want to just leave on that note, and we're done. But I want to talk about what we can do going forward, and part of what the green plan is part of is it's supposed to be part, you know, I said it was aspirational, but also inspirational. I mean, these are a lot of big stuff, but it's stuff that, you know, kind of makes sense, that it's not that hard to do. We just have to switch a little bit of how we think, but we can make this transition, I think, work for everybody in a way that actually said, well, I should have done that a long time ago. So to that, we set up 10 goals for the city that encompass a whole bunch of things, which I'll get into here, but we tried to be very holistic in how we looked at this. So the first, and one could argue the most primary goal that we have here, is 100% clean and affordable energy. So what that means is that by 2030, all the energy that we use for municipal facilities will come from, all the energy we use will come from renewable sources. So one way or the other, I'll be candid with you, by 2030, we're not going to get every single piece of equipment we have electric so that it can be powered by green. What we'll have to do is probably buy a few credits to meet that goal. But the effort will be is to get, by 2030, get as close as we can so that all our buildings are heated with electricity, green electricity, I should say, and that all of our transportation, our fleets are powered by electricity as well. So it's a pretty big lift. It's only 9 years away, but I think we can do that. And then by 2035, all the electricity in the city would be powered by renewable resources. So everybody who uses electricity in the city, that electricity would be green. And then by 2045, we'd wrap in heating and transportation for the entire city, so that everybody is doing what we hope to do from the city's perspective in 2030. By 2045, that's the standard that everyone is using. So every home, every business, either directly or indirectly through credits, is offsetting their fossil fuel emission impact such that it is zero. So that's the goal. That's actually 5 years before what the state mandates through their carbon roadmap, which is 2050. A lot of folks talking about 2050. This is actually 5 years before. We'll all, of course, have a greenhouse gas emissions inventory update to start us off. We're going to be doing that this year. That's one of the things on our goals, is we got to get our baseline. Okay, where are we? So we know where to plan to go forward. And then we're going to use our community choice aggregation plan, which will allow us, which already exists, by the way, in the city, and a lot of other communities are doing it as well, and allows you to purchase electricity from green resources. So it's not just powered by solar farms and perhaps windmills in the city itself, but it can be from outside the city that gets imported into the city. That's 100% green. Vineyard Wind out in outside the Cape there is a good example of how wind is going to play a major role in allowing us to do this. And we're going to set a climate budget for the city government so that all of our we can't go beyond our budget is the goal, so that we can actually set up emissions goals for ourselves by setting that climate budget. All right. Quick, because of this one being so important, I want to just briefly touch on why the targets that we have as a city are a little bit different than what the targets are set by the IPCC. The IPCC is the international group that basically is the the be all and end all of defining what we need to do in order to get our emissions low enough that we don't create more than 1.5 degrees Celsius of climate temperature increase rather, to minimize the impacts of climate change. They are a very reputable group, and they have basically defined, and some of you guys may have heard, that we have to get to roughly 50% cuts by 2030, and the rest of those cuts by 2050. Our targets, you can see, are a little different. And the reason behind that is we're not the world. I mean, basically it comes down to is the city has different aspects to it than the world does as a whole. And so we set ours based on what we can do in the city. In some cases, we're actually a little more aggressive than they are, and in others we are not. But I think in the net, we come out to the same place. And that's why, just because we need to work with what we have here as opposed to what the whole world needs to do. So we do need to be on the same path. Another way of putting it is, I think that often is like we all need to be on the same 5-10 lane highway. We all need to go in the same direction, but all of us are going to be switching lanes from time to time, and that's going to happen. So that's the analogy I like to use with folks is like, absolutely, we're going to be on this lane and the world may be on a whole different lane, but we're all heading in the same direction. That's the point. So that was goal 1. I've got 9 more. Try to keep it quick, but I think it's important just to at least highlight and mention what they are. So the next one is net zero and climate resilient buildings. I think it's pretty self-evident that buildings are a big user of that. Our building right here is a great example of some of the progress you can make with our solar array right on top. It also, what we want to make sure is it's climate resilient so that if there is a disaster at some point, whether it's at your home or at your business, that your home or business, the facility itself can withstand some of it, or at the very least can be repaired in relatively short order. And that includes making sure that the lights stay on at least a while after it's over, before recovery efforts can be made. The next one is climate change resilience, which is basically what I was just talking about, is making sure our infrastructure is resilient to the effects of climate change. I talked about that briefly earlier. That's a real thing. It's not a question anymore of if it happens, it's when. So we need to start being prepared to deal with that as soon as we can. Basically, it's to make the city resilient to climate change impacts such as extreme storms, flooding, and heat. It's the strategies here. And then move on to the next one, which is like connected green and blue spaces with healthy and natural systems. So for those who don't live in Worcester, Worcester actually has 60 parks and we have 20 lakes and ponds, which is more than I think most people are aware of. And so what we want to do is maintain and improve and connect all our natural systems. So it's a linked, so they're linked with one another. So it's a whole network of parks and open spaces and water bodies. And that includes street trees and public places. And making sure that we look at through those health and equity lenses I mentioned earlier, so that we don't have all the, traditionally, unfortunately, a lot of the open space and the green space and the blue spaces are over on one side of the city and not so much on the other, and that needs to be rebalanced somehow. Not that we can move them, obviously, we're not moving any parks. Very important distinction there, but we need to bring those new parks into spaces that they typically haven't. Sustainable transportation choices. This is a real big one that affects a whole bunch of other of these, and these all plans all overlap one another too. As you do one of these things, that helps improve some of the others. Transportation choices is not just driving your car around, but also includes biking and walking and mobility and scooter bikes and the whole bit. You got it. So all that's in play. A lot of folks now using the term mobility as opposed to transportation, just to sort of we've identified transportation with cars so often for so long switching the term to mobility may help us reframe that and think it in a different way, which I think could be helpful. But basically it's to provide safe, convenient, and affordable pedestrian, bicycle, and public transportation networks, and transition vehicles to be powered by renewable electricity. So that's the goal. That has multiple benefits, which we just mentioned there too. The next one is zero waste. So zero waste is pretty bold, but that's what we're hoping for is that where our society in particular, Americans are notorious for being some of the biggest wasters of materials. Our landfills are almost all filled up in Massachusetts. We export a lot of it to other states and other countries. We need to just figure out a way to use less. A lot of that. Maine just recently passed a very interesting law, which I'm curious to see how this plays out. And they're shifting a lot of the responsibility from the end user, the person who buys it, you and me typically, to the manufacturer of it, so that a lot of that waste needs to be much more thoughtfully dealt with, and that they're on the hook for the stuff that doesn't get properly done, properly disposed of. And by properly disposed of, I don't mean just going into a landfill or incinerator, but it's something that it can be reused, recycled, that kind of, that's what we're kind of looking for. And part of that is just simply we just package things a lot more efficiently so that we don't waste it in the first place. And that includes food waste too, which is a whole other separate but related thing, which is a big, big factor. One of the key pieces on this, I just mentioned too, is that we really don't have a good plan in place to deal with this in a holistic way. And so one of the key pieces that we're thinking about here is part of the whole Green Rooster plan, which is, like I said, more of a menu. But one of the dishes we want on there is a zero waste master plan that we can use that would impact clearly the city, but probably in concert with folks in the region as well. So we want a one water integrated water management plan, which basically so that we'd be looking at our drinking water, our wastewater, and our storm water as one resource. And we want to increase the use of natural green infrastructure to help manage the storm water and avoid flooding. So one of the great examples of that is something we have right down at the bottom of our parking lot here is much more common uses of rain gardens and other infrastructure that's pervious as opposed to non-pervious pieces. So that if you have, there are cases where like our own parking lot here, it's a non-pervious surface, so that all the rainwater that comes off the roof and the parking lot itself runs right down toward the lake, toward the street, and then toward the lake, and that's not good, especially on a big rainy day. A lot of that stuff can take a whole bunch of stuff with it that we don't want in our lakes and in our infrastructure.
It all goes to rain garden.
Now, exactly. Now, with our rain garden, that stuff goes into the rain garden. It can be absorbed by the rain garden, filtered through there, and then released much, much more slowly back onto the street into the lake. But it's been effectively, we've filtered it, which is, and not in a big, huge rush where all the contaminants can get in there. That kind of forward thinking is what we needed across the whole community, across all our communities. We've done it up at the senior center, something very similar, same idea. We'll be the parking lot there. At some point, we're going to start looking at parking lots that aren't made out of non-pervious or pervious materials, so that we can make sure that the water can percolate through it directly. The downside with those is that they get clogged up themselves and we have to clean them, and that's the process that we don't really have the infrastructure yet to deal with, but it's something we need to put on the menu and figure that out. Sustainable and local food systems. So food, we need to make sure that everyone has access to food that is sustainably produced, locally sourced, it's healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate. I think this is maybe in some ways the most intuitive one. It's sort of, we are what we eat, and we need to make sure that what we eat is good for us, and as much of it can be is sustainably produced. the good news is we have a lot of, not just in the city side, but a lot of other organizations that work in the city that do just this kind of work through community gardens. So in that sense, I think this is one of those ones where we have some infrastructure that's already built in, which is very encouraging. Pollution prevention. So a lot of that is what I was talking to you before about the health lens that we're talking about, is to make sure that people can breathe healthy indoor and outdoor air and are not exposed to contaminated soils and toxic products. So we have a few strategies for that, but I think again that's pretty straightforward in terms of why we think it's important and the value of it based on what we were just talking about earlier. One of the, and I think I'm winding down to the end here, but I want to make sure that we also touch on the fact that sustainability and resilience is in all our policies and in our education too, because this is not something that is taught as much as it probably should be in our schools. And if anyone who has kids knows that one of the drivers that gets changed to happen in a lot of families is the kids say, "This is what I'm doing." And all of a sudden the whole family's doing it, and that's just the way it is. So so having this part, this an education that talks about sustainability and resilience can have dramatic effect, I think, on how people think about it, and then in turn how they act and how they vote and how they use their funds and resources in the world. That's key. We want to make the city a regional center for sustainability education and training, and for the green jobs that I mentioned here too. I mean, part of this is economic. We need to make sure that we have green jobs here. A lot of fossil fuel jobs actually we have quite a few here in Worcester, but there's actually potential for a lot more than what exists in the fossil fuel industry in the green job industry in Worcester. And primarily that is because we don't produce the fossil fuels here. Those fossil fuel jobs are all elsewhere, but you can produce renewable energy here, and the upkeep for all of that can be done right here locally, which is an opportunity for additional economic benefit through work and jobs here, local jobs that we haven't had before. And then lastly, I think this is lastly, but certainly by no means least, is that we're transparent and accountable. When we've created a new Department of Sustainability and Resilience in the city that just started up as of effective July 1, which I'm going to be fortunate enough to be a part of. We're going to have a Green Worcester Advisory Committee that will have folks outside of city government included, and representatives from folks that are often not at the table. We make sure that we get the right people at the table to make our decisions on what we want to move forward with next. We're going to coordinate with, of course, our other city departments, and we'll have report cards to judge how we're doing for all this stuff. And of course, we're going to pursue funding to make this all happen, because funding is going to obviously be a key piece. Talked about all these already, so I won't bore you with that. And that was it. Hey, thank you.
We have a few questions online, if you're interested.
We have a couple of questions coming from online, and we have questions here as well. Would you be willing to engage us?
Of course. But I can't believe that after speaking for 40 minutes there, that I did answer all the questions.
I think these are just a little bit more specific. From Bernadette and Brian Nelson. Will Worcester be building many charging stations for electric vehicles? How can one charge an electric vehicle from a standard multifamily home?
That's an excellent question, and it's I will say the short answer is yes. That is in the pipeline already in terms of how we deal with that specific issue. Right now, we're looking at installing them at some of our public facilities. They're already in a few of our public garages, but I think to the question itself is, if you don't have your own driveway and an area where you could plug in from your house, like if you're in a 3-family or somewhere else where you don't have a driveway and you park on the street, how would you charge your car? So what's the point of buying an electric vehicle if I can't charge it? So how do you do that is that a couple things need to happen. One is that we need to have an option so that people can plug in from the street. And I know National Grid is looking at, in cooperation with a lot of communities, including Worcester, putting some of those charging stations right on the street for people to use. There's also going to be the option where people can perhaps go to an open parking lot where at night there won't be any charge for it. Where, think of like a library parking lot is a familiar one, where people can park, and we'll have options at the light poles where you can get it. It won't be a fast charge, but you could put it in and plug it in and charge up right in the parking lot. And so if you live close to one of those, that might be another option. There's a lot of things in the works to make that happen. But I think the important thing to remember is that a lot of people say, well, I need one in my house. I said, well, you don't have that now. You don't have a gas station at your house. You have to go to somewhere to fill up your gas. This may be the exact same thing. You may have to go somewhere to charge up your car. Charging cars will happen faster and faster. Some of these bigger level 2 and level 3 stations are available, where you can go to a place and get your car from virtually no charge to 80+% charged in 10 minutes. So that's not much longer than what you do for a regular gas station as it is, and that's coming. That's already starting on some of the interstate highways, some of the places where you can go off and get gas. They're actually offering now spaces adjacent to them where you can get rapid charging. So some of that's going to happen on that infrastructure too, and I think we're going to have to follow that same path. So
I'm going to actually recommend that we do this way. We're going to start at this end and work our way over. Let's combine our comments for John with also, if you have a joy or sorrow that you would like to share this morning, so that we might also be able to know those. And if you don't have anything to offer or to say, that's fine. Just simply pass the microphone on to the next person.
Thank you. But I've just got my next $1 million idea. You get your charge in 10 minutes. Dunkin' Donuts, coffee and a jolt. Get your coffee, there you go.
wow, and the slogan to go with it. I love it.
There you go.
That's excellent.
Thanks. I inferred, and maybe you were implying, that the biggest controversy of the plan is probably around the ban on new gas connections. And so the question becomes, what is new construction? I know federal agencies put a lot of work into defining new construction to help and be fair and avoid confusion and improper incentives. So if you have one lot that's green and somebody puts in a new building and they can't get a gas connection, and then you got a lot next to it where somebody demolishes a beautiful or maybe not so beautiful building, puts up a new one, there's a gas connection, they think, oh, I can use that. If that happens, a lot of people are going to get upset and people are going to get sued. So these federal regulations define new construction based on the date that construction starts relative to the effective date of the regulation, and the percentage of the cost of whatever is there, what the percentage of the cost that's new construction versus the total value of the building. So I just wondered if the state or the city has been looking into that and trying to, because that could affect a lot of people in different ways, not just the example that I gave.
Yeah, the short answer, just to from the city's perspective, is yes, but only just started. So there's no answer yet. It's something that is actively on the table to look at, but that is a huge question, and to do this fairly in a way that is going to people will be impacted, no doubt about this, as we start the transition, but that we do it with the rules in place, that we're very clear about it and transparent about it, and that we have some flexibility in certain circumstances, because there will be certain circumstances where we're going to need that flexibility. Figuring that all out is still an act in progress.
Well, I guess my joy is just, it's exciting to hear this plan. I think I find that I don't feel like I hear a lot of joyful news about the environment lately, so this is exciting. I have a question, and I don't know if you have the answer, but I live not in Worcester, I live in Princeton, and it's interesting because I'm in a place which is not that far from Worcester, but where we see a lot of open green spaces that were farmland now becoming solar farms, and I have really mixed feelings about it. I think like, oh, this is great, this is all this renewable energy, but are we swapping food for electricity? And I guess I don't know what the net, you know, where the good and where the bad is, and I don't know if you have information on that or if it's just putting it out there. So what the relationship between Worcester and the surrounding places where this renewable energy is coming from, and how that impacts the outside communities as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Very good observation, because it's different for every community and for every area in different communities. Some places it's a no-brainer where you put it, and in other places it can really be a potential issue. There are a lot of factors, far too many to go. You know, it's a rabbit hole that's very deep that we could go down, talking about it and understanding it. I think the short answer is that there's basically three buckets that we look at this in. One where you just can't do it and really shouldn't do it. We should not be clearing virgin forests with almost no exceptions to put in solar, for example. That's a pretty easy one to put on one side. There are other examples where if you have a new roof that faces south, that there's no good reason why you wouldn't include solar there, for example. Putting it in for a lot of new upgrades to parking is another great example where we should be doing it. But there's a big middle area where it's just not clearly defined. Is the net benefit worth it? And how we do that is probably going to become on a case-by-case basis, and I think we're going to be figuring that as we go. In some cases, it might actually, the net is something that a community wants to pursue. I think that the danger is that we put in this one-size-fit-all rules that are in place that can either dramatically inhibit or expand it to a point on either way that might be problematic. I really do think we need to be very thoughtful about that. I know a lot of communities, like for instance, smaller communities, have, because there was sort of like a wild, it was the Wild West out there for a long time with solar. It just, everyone, you can make a lot of money doing solar all of a sudden with the incentives. And so a lot of people got into it and really didn't know what they were doing, A, and B, wanted to do it in big bulk chunks and said, we got a piece of farmland here, we're just going to make it solar without looking at the longer term repercussions. So that it's a thoughtful nuance that needs to be addressed. I don't have an answer for that, but I do know that it's a really good question.
I think probably putting it on buildings is more of a better choice.
Typically it is.
Hi, I'm Nancy, and I go with John, and I have a better understanding of what you do now.
You just needed the PowerPoint.
That's my joy. He's never showed me the PowerPoint before, and I don't know why. So actually, we talk every night about what we do over a beer, or a glass of wine, and so I know bits and pieces, of course, of his work. But it was really interesting. So that's my joy.
Thank you. I have a question and, well, I guess, and a comment. With all of this madness about producing, making energy sources for us, I don't want us to forget that we can reduce our use of energy too. And I just read an article in Nature Conservancy that we have to not even recycle, but reduce. We're a country of gotta have it. And the other thing, how does one get on this advisory board, city advisory board,
Sure. No, it's a good question. So we're working on that now. So a couple of the people that are going to be on it for sure are the people who we already had on, who are the advisory committee to put together the plan itself. So some people will carry over. There will be some people that we're looking for representation from. Probably we'll divide it by each district so that each counselor can feel, city councilor can feel like that his or her district is being represented. And then there'll probably be a few people from different kind of organizations like nonprofit, labor, business, etc. When we decide how that specific will be done, which we plan to do this fall, we'll make it public so that people who are interested can apply for any of the positions they think would be, in their fit for them, if they're depending on the district and, like I said, all the other parameters. So we'll make it public, and then people can apply, and then we'll select from that. Ultimately, it'll be the city manager who will make the final call on it.
Hi, I'm Pauline. I don't really have any questions regarding what you said. I think you've covered quite a bit, and I just don't want to make something up just because I need to have a question. So I'm just going to make a comment about climate change that I've noticed at my house. I have tin shutters by my front door, and I've always had wasps behind those tin shutters. But now it's so hot at times in the summertime that they're no longer there. I had a snake or two that would live behind my my stoop in the front. Because there's a separation, a little one, between the stoop and the wall of the house. And they no longer live there. And I have ducks that come from the water to my bird feeder because the bird seed, I actually have thrown bird seed down on the ground for squirrels and other birds. And they come from the water, that area, to eat the bird seed. And I have ducks that come, and I also have ducks now swimming in my woods, which is an anomaly. So there's something wrong, and I don't know if that can ever get fixed because I'm a private property.
There's actually a massive insect die-off occurring right now globally.
Falling behind you.
Whoop.
Back up. Guess not.
I don't know if I should. Okay, I like wrote stuff on my hand for
I wrote down some notes on here.
Okay, so to Carol's point, so I'm also interested in getting involved. I was wondering how many slots or positions, whatever the term is for, how big is this initiative? How many people are you looking for? Because I went back to get a master's in environmental science, and there were no jobs. So I ended up taking an admin job, burnout ensued, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm just like, I would love to get involved. And I'm like wondering how to do that. So this sounds like it would be a great opportunity, but I'm just trying to temper my expectations.
Yeah, the good news, if you can call it that, is I think we're going to have a lot of people who are going to be interested in being on this, which is a dramatic change from just a few years ago. I'm not entirely sure how many slots we're going to have. That's still to be determined, but it'll probably be 9 or 11 is my guess. Like I said, the makeup of that specifically won't be, and how long the term would be is still not defined. I suspect we'll probably have a rotating thing for 1 or 2 or 3 years. We want to bring in new voices pretty regularly, so I don't think we'd have folks who would stay on for too long. But we also want to encourage people who have, that have been a real good voice for a certain community or not. We want to make sure that they have enough time to have value to the group. So figuring that out is not clearly determined yet.
Okay, well, thank you. So is it volunteer, would you say, or like paid position?
For the city, it's definitely going to be, well, we're going to have a couple new jobs that we're looking for: an energy analyst, which will, these 2 jobs will get posted in the near future, an energy analyst and a program manager. basically to help us run the programs that we hope to get some state and federal and philanthropic funds for. So that those two are going to be posted in the next few weeks, and then later we'll have a chief clerk position, which is someone who knows the details of new construction as we go into buildings and such, and can actually be very helpful in terms of what the code requires and all the other things to make sure we're meeting those expectations.
Thank you. And I'm going to try not to hog this, because I just had so many things that, like when Carol was saying, reduction is so important and our culture doesn't emphasize that, which feeds into a bunch of other things I wrote down. So just to touch on it real quick. I mean, we were looking into trying to get solar on our roof. Why, for some reason, the tax incentives are disappearing after this year to do so. So we're in like a time crunch. It's COVID. We don't have the financial means to be able to, time is not on our side. So why are those incentives going away? And I forget if it's the federal or the state level. You don't have to answer that. I'm just going to read through this list so I don't end up hogging this mic too long. So that was one question I had. Second is, why aren't there green trade schools? I mean, we've got plumbing, electrical, every essential thing that society needs. But there's like, I would have really benefited, I think, from a hands-on program. So not to diss Boston University, but I mean, I did not go outside for any classes in their environmental policy, energy and environmental analysis and policy. And I'm like waiting to see, like, do any of these classes get you outside? No. And so what are we teaching people? Like, how does this help anybody? Hands-on experience. And so I think we need green trade schools, like everything from gardening, what you guys are doing here is amazing, to solar, to, how everyone should be able to know how to put a solar panel on the roof themselves. If,
Might be
in
some
an
insurance
ideal
issues there.
situation, that would be cool. Anyway, pipe dream.
Plug and play.
Yeah. Would that be a neat skill to have? Like,
Well, I
how
mean,
cool
maybe
would that
new
be?
buildings
Let's
should
talk
be
to the
built with
laborers
solar.
union, huh?
And, but also, I think the bigger point, and like you were saying, education being like one of the biggest drivers of this as one of the 10 menu items, or I think that's really important too. And being able to have curiosity-based learning is something we really suck at, to just not mince words. And it's sad. And I read this, fascinating article, I think it might have been in the New York Times, about this plant that it survives in, I forget, it's like an African desert. It's lived for millennia. And this plant, it's like, it grows two leaves, and it just continues to grow. And then it turns into this like unfurling thing. And they're trying to study, like, Darwin came across it. I mean, he obviously wasn't the first to come across it, but he's writing about it, and he's like, I just basically get on my knees and marvel at this plant. And I mean, the way that we teach people doesn't do any of this justice. Go outside. I love how these services are outside, and I just want to say that. That's the last thing I'll say.
Location of that
So
plant
thank
is
you.
secret, so
So
nobody
anyway,
goes
thank
and
you for all.
destroys it.
Certainly.
So, yeah, I had a few comments.
Well, you speak into the microphone.
Okay, so I'm not sure that 0% waste is statistically possible, because you can never really, I mean, there are always diminishing returns, right?
Of course, but I also think that a goal of 11% is probably not going to capture people's imagination enough. So
right,
what we went with, let's make it. Let's go for the circular economy that we're all talked and want. So
yeah, I work in security, and I would be like, oh well, I'll have 100% secure system, and that's not how it works.
Nope, you got it.
Also, I think you were mentioning particulate matter coming from fossil fuel burning of cars. You're talking about like metal particulate matter.
There's a wide range of particulates that come from the burning of fossil fuels. Coal is notorious for having a whole bunch of them that are pretty bad. And unfortunately, there are an awful lot of coal coal-fired plant still in operation, even here in the States. And so it's from those, from coal, from oil, from gas, from transportation, all of that combined.
Okay. I'm also wondering if there's any citywide plan to try to get more people to install solar. Because I know the town that I grew up in had a citywide incentive for residents to all install their like tax breaks and stuff.
That's a great question. Yeah, that program right now is in a sort of a hiatus, but the concept is that there was some very specific a program that had some extra incentives for folks to participate in becoming and getting solar on the roof of their home. There were a few wrinkles with that program, and it's why a lot of the bigger cities did not participate. There's just proportionally, it got a little challenging because a lot of the homes here that we have in Worcester are older, had older roofs. It didn't make a whole lot of sense because you had to put in a new roof too. The income levels here in Worcester candidly aren't as high as they are in some of the communities that took advantage of this.
A PPA versus buying.
We could have, and PPAs are another thing that has been, that has had some pros and cons. So long story short is we didn't think the value of it was gonna, we thought with our limited resources, the value of doing some other things, it made more sense to focus on those than the solar program that you referenced. But I do think, to your point, I think you're absolutely right, is that we do need the kind of incentives that could allow people, community solar is a great one, where we can allow folks who may not have the direct ability to install solar at their particular home or business, but can still get the benefits of that. So, if we had, use an example, if we have solar even in our own parking lot here at UU, we could eventually sell some of that electricity to folks in our congregation who don't live, adjacent to the church, but get the benefit of that and help us pay for the cost of installing it. That's an credits as well, and offsets and all the rest. Yes, and that may make it economically viable for folks who who either can't or choose not to do it.
I think that's going to be the turning point, is when it's more financially feasible to use alternative energy than it is to use fossil fuels.
Sure.
And I don't know what your thoughts are for getting any closer to that, or if we're there yet.
We're getting closer. I'm not sure we're there yet, but we're certainly getting closer. I think there's finding the exact time to do that is to be determined. We have a couple here too.
Okay, I'll pass it on. Talking too much.
All right. Thank you.
I've got a lot of other questions, so I'll hold back.
Again, from Bernadette and Brian Nelson, along with their thanks to you, John, for your leadership on these issues and the intent, like Maggie was just saying, to involve schools in the planning and include youth and college students, mature and experienced members of our community have some great ideas. It's amazing how cleaner the world got when things shut down due to the pandemic. And she has a specific question about the water pump at Elm Park. Is it going to be repaired? It's turning into a swamp.
I don't know the answer to that one.
I've heard Elm Park is going to be torn down somewhat, and the Doherty School is going to be expanded onto a lot of the land of the park. Oh, Newton Hill. Sorry.
So as we conclude our time, I want to thank John for his expertise and his willingness to share his material with us. We're going to turn to an opportunity to provide that which is symbolic of your own efforts and your own values, offering in service to maintaining the ministry and mission of this congregation. I will invite us to hear a song by Peter Mayer while we're doing that, and we'll allow this to be our our benediction as well for a wonderful morning out in the sunshine. With the breeze blowing, I absolutely agree that being outdoors in a season like this is optimal. I'm very grateful to you for taking the time to be together this morning. And for those of you who joined us online, you're welcome to participate in our offering at this time by texting your offering to 508-231-5335 or visiting www.ucworcester.org/donate. And blessings to all of you, and thank you very much for being here this morning.
When I was a boy each week, Sunday we would go to church, pay attention to, and he would read the holy word, and consecrate the holy bread, and everyone would kneel and bow. Today the only difference is everything is holy now. Everything is holy now. And when I was in Sunday school, we would learn about the time Moses split the sea in two. Jesus made the water wine. And I remember feeling sad. Miracles don't happen still. Now I can't keep track, 'cause everything's a miracle. Everything, everything's a miracle. Wine from water is not so small. Better magic trick. Said everything is here at home. So challenging thing becomes not to look for miracles, to find where there isn't one. When holy water was rare at best, barely wet my fingertips. And now I have to hold my breath like I'm swimming in a sea of air. Used to be a world half there, heaven's second rate hand me down. But I walk up with a reverend air, 'cause everything is holy now. We questioning Child's face, say it's not a testament. That'd be very hard to say. See another new morning come. Say it's not a sacrament. Tell you that it can't be done. This morning outside I stood, saw a little red winged bird shining like a burning bush, singing like a scripture verse. It made me wanna bow my head. I remember when church let out, how things have
changed since then. Everything is holding now. It used to be a world half there, heaven second rate, hand me down. But I walk it with a reverent hair, cause everything is whole now.
Once again, beloved, worship in this place has come to an end, but our service continues. Next with an opportunity for quiet conversation amongst ourselves. And for those of you who are online, if you would like to remain online to have time for a social hour in virtual space, please hang on and we will be right with you. Have a wondrous and wonderful week, everyone.